All right, guys. This is part two of, I think originally the part one was, I don't know how many years ago, Kirsty, was that like 10 years
It's
ago,
a couple
5 years.
now.
So I follow this amazing group of people on LinkedIn about metabolic health, one of my favorite topics. And I got Kirsty to come on the show all the way from Australia. You're early morning for you, my evening time. You're Tuesday, I'm Monday. So it's always confusing when we're scheduling these calls, but I appreciate your time and starting your day with us.
No, perfect. I'm excited to get into all things metabolism, mitochondria, and anything else that comes up.
Yeah. So tell people a little bit about what you do if they don't follow you on your favorite post that you have on the LinkedIn, my favorite post, but talk about your passion, your purpose, what you're working on.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm an exercise physiologist, which I don't know what the applicable is over in America, but I'm really passionate about all things metabolism. So when it comes to not so much performance, but I've actually got into the space of chronic disease as well, and more recently in terms of Alzheimer's and the role of fuel metabolism in the brain as well. So every day is a school day, and just love helping people and learning, and yeah, all the research coming out, but more so the practical application.
Yeah, I've had this podcast since 2012 and suddenly it's 2025 as we record this. And I'm really focused as I age too, shifting the focus on improving how we age at a cellular level, just because we've always been talking to athletes, but being fit and healthy from the inside out is so essential. And it's not just exercising all the time. It's really going, am I doing all the right things for my health today? So I am the best self that I can be in the future. So recreating our current self so we can be our ideal self in the future is really what I think people are working on because there's so much talk about VO2 max that people follow Peter Attia. And so this getting to be more known, but talk about how you test to find out are we doing all the right things now to improve our metabolism and our mitochondria and all things to improve aging process.
Yeah, some really interesting comments there. And that's where I like to think of life as health span as opposed to lifespan. Because unfortunately, what we tend to see in today's modern world is that we're living longer, but the quality of life isn't there. And I don't think that's what we're going to strive for. We want that, as I said, to enjoy our aging, particularly when people retire and those sorts of things. So, what I've been personally having a look at, and it's not to negate the fact that VO2 max and exercise is really important. It is a big predictor of overall mortality and death. However, what we really want to focus on is the here and now. We're not all elite athletes. And that's what metabolism testing enables me to do. Have a look at what's happening in the human body from that inside so we can build inside out, as you say, which reflects on everything to our energy levels, our weight management, and even things like our skin as well. So by looking at a technology called indirect calorimetry, which is the gold standard for assessing human metabolism. It's a breathing test. And what that allows me to do is essentially have a look at whether someone's metabolism is fast or slow, number one, by having a look at oxygen consumption. And this is where it gets really tricky or interesting, shall I say. We all think having a slow metabolism is bad. But actually, if your cells are nice and efficient, just like a car, you might need less fuel, so your metabolism's deemed slow, but it's actually really good for aging. So this is where the premise of reduced calories in some populations has been linked with reduced aging. So by measuring that oxygen consumption, there's 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. We're able to see what people breathe out. And this is a really strong indicator for mitochondrial function. The healthier the mitochondria, where all the energy production occurs in the body, the lower that number. So we can look at change over time to make sure interventions are working or and changing it up if they're not, but also I think an underrated aspect of that is keeping people motivated, particularly if they're not exercise inclined or they're changing their medications and those sorts of things. We can monitor those sorts of aspects and help educate. So I had an interesting email from a client the other day, and one of their patients is going through radiation therapy, and their efficiency was really good. And then they've gone through radiation therapy, which is required, and their mitochondrial health really dropped. And I've never seen anything like it, but it just goes to show is during these times that maybe when we do need medical intervention or medication changes, we need to even focus more on lifestyle and things within our control, because it can have a big impact. So, like diet and the exercise and the sleep, all of these key pillars when we're stressed they tend to go by the wayside. But what I really like to say is that's when we need to focus on them more, because other aspects are impacting it with the outside of our control. And lastly, I just want to touch on that's an aging aspect of metabolism, also key for performance as well. But one thing I'm really passionate about is fat oxidation rates. So when we're looking at metabolic carts and this indirect calorimetry, ideally want them to have a CO2 sensor, which enables us to see the carbon dioxide production, which is a waste product. And the bodies are designed to burn mainly fat at rest, about 80%, which gives off less CO2. So by looking at that and the oxygen, we can actually see at rest what fuel someone's using. And this has been shown in research to predict things like diabetes, regain from weight loss surgery, just general weight regain. And it's when patients aren't burning fat, which is about 2/3 of the patients that present with, low energy chronic disease. This is something that we can see in the here and now that's not stuck in stone, that we can change for, as I said, that better quality of life, not only quantity. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I went off in a few different directions, but hopefully that explains a little bit.
No, so you're going back to you're saying people going through different surgeries and treatments, whatnot. Are you testing the resting metabolic rate during that time to identify if their mitochondria are getting damaged from that, or how are you measuring mitochondria?
Yeah, so metabolism can change within 3 to 5 days. So it's not my specialty area. It was just a really interesting case that's forever learning. Even, we've had breastfeeding mothers and their efficiency tends to be really good. There is some metabolic adaptation that occurs with all the hormones and pregnancies and things like that. Not my specialty area, but interesting nonetheless. One thing that has come up a lot recently is clinic in terms of this monitoring is the use of bariatric weight loss surgery and GLP-1s. We know that metabolic adaptation can occur. So that's the slowing of the metabolic rate. The extreme example is the Biggest Loser contestants that had their metabolism tested. But what we know is because they're essentially so effective at reducing appetite, people might not meet their protein loads and those sorts of things. So there might be, go into starvation mode and losing muscle, which definitely doesn't help pain, energy, weight regain, and particularly blood sugar levels, which is the reason why some people go on these as well. So there was a study in the UK which actually used the same metabolic cart I use, eCal, which looked at that metabolic adaptation and talking about how important it is, particularly post weight loss surgery, that we need to monitor these key aspects and put things like resistance-based training in place, or at least educating them, because you can't manage what you don't measure. And the really interesting one in the GLP-1 space is I've often found a lot of patients, even though they're on them and they do reduce appetite, and let's be honest, we can't be on them forever, they're still not burning fat because they're not addressing the root cause. And so what that means is, for example, if they come off them, they'll be hungry and regain their weight. They might be losing that muscle, which is once again why testing in conjunction with body composition can be really interesting. And because we've only, they've just exploded. We don't know all the information, but what
Yeah.
has been interesting is over here, I don't know the brand names for everywhere, but something as opposed to Ozempic, but Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide, has been the only one that has been shown to influence fat metabolism per se. The other
Oh.
ones just essentially um, impact hunger and those sorts of things, where the tirzepatide actually impacts fat tissue and can have a role in that fat oxidation. So I'm now getting some of those clients through monitoring that. But the key is it comes back once again, there is a really handy tool in the kit, but optimally we need to focus on lifestyle. So if they're not burning fat, we need to get them burning fat so they can, as they utilize that tool the best they can for what the reason that they went on it. So really
Yeah.
interesting space.
I've been so fascinated about this whole area since, I don't know, got to be big a year ago and just trying to follow this. And in North San Diego, where I live now, trying to pitch Pinoe metabolism testing because I have the portable cart to do the RMR testing for people giving that drug. It's like, don't you want to know if they are impacting their metabolism? And I've gotten zero interest. And like, why are you giving these drugs out to help people with weight loss? It should be fat loss, muscle, not muscle loss. And how many people out there are giving this drug trying to help people, but they're really not helping people in the long run? And if you could add this simple, affordable test to do every month, even to see, are we doing all the right things to make the right type of shift in the metabolism? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Once again, you can't manage what you don't measure. So, a one analogy I do love to use in clinic is about blood pressure.
Mhm.
Imagine if you went to the GP and they just guess your blood pressure. You'd walk out there very frustrated. Yet metabolism drives not only, as I said,
Yeah.
performance, weight, chronic disease, all these key elements for that quality of life. Yet we don't
Hmm.
measure it when we
Yeah.
can.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of reasons. Is up until now, the space is definitely changing. However, these metabolic carts were really expensive. The software wasn't really designed to be used by practitioners. It was more a research tool. But as I
Hmm.
said, now we're changing that space, particularly eCal that I'm using and the metabolic and software platforms behind that and forever growing enables it to be used in clinic. And if anyone is interested, there is a couple of papers using actually clinical data in terms of fasting, but also therapeutic carbohydrate restriction that shows that, hey, it is actually applicable in clinic and can really improve outcomes. Once again, a study that's using Australian data, but a study in the UK showed the same interventions, but simply using a metabolic cart improve their outcomes in terms of weight loss by 2.5 times. So before I say anything wrong, let me try and find the stat. But yeah, 5 times the amount of people achieved that significant 5% weight loss threshold in this study simply by measuring being treated by an elite athlete. And I suspect that's really where the role in education and motivation comes in. And
Yeah.
then I know myself as a practitioner, it enables me to, as you attended to before, validate the intervention I'm giving, even though, at a population level, we know these things might work. But what about at an individual level? Similar to BMI, great for population, terrible for individuals because it does not tell the whole story.
Yeah, exactly. You need to know the whole story. And we always say as practitioners, test and not guess because you're just trying to give someone a program, this one size fits all program, and not give specific information based on data and course correct as you go by retesting and seeing what's going on. So, with the role of mitochondria, as I keep trying to share people information out there, we hear to improve quality of life, longevity, look at VO2 max, and then we want to work on improving that number. But how do we do that? Is it to do with the mitochondria function as well as the cardiovascular system? Like what? should we do to say we have this number? What should we do to improve it so we can improve the quality of life?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I just want to take a step back to highlight that even, for example, people using this machine to test Olympic athletes actually do it at rest, which is really interesting. And the reason is even athletes are spending most of their time at rest. So when it, once again, using heaps of car analogies, is we need to make sure it can do slow bog laps before we do that other aspect because it has a key role in recovery and that energy and all those sorts of things. So that's really what we want to have a look at rest before we worry about, this is my personal opinion, VO2 maxes, which, as I said, has an impact, but let's take it a step back, particularly for the populations I deal with in terms of chronic disease and aging, as you say, is it might be uncomfortable or there might be some limitations. Is it beneficial? Yes, but is it necessary? As I said, I don't use it in clinic personally, but do definitely feel as though there's value and outcomes. But let's strip it back to, well, can we assess mitochondrial health in other ways? Is things like biopsies the gold standard for looking at mitochondrial health? They are an option, but they're not available. So let's just, as I said, what tools do we have available? And let's have a look at indicators for mitochondrial health, which we can do with, like, as I said, for myself, a simple breathing test. So what that can enable us to do is have a look at, for example, we know that fasting is designed to increase a process called autophagy, which is essentially the process of getting rid of or repairing dead cells and mitochondria that might not be working functionally and replacing those parts. Because when we're eating all the time, we've got to focus on digesting all that food and not repairing the cells. So there is that process. And, there's a debate about how long that takes, but I know people in clinic get benefit from 16 hours, but as I said, the longer, particularly under supervised medical interventions, can be more beneficial. But once again, is it necessary? And that's where that testing removes that guesswork. Similar with, we talked about medications or even something like CPAP for sleep apnea. Deal with a lot of middle-aged females in terms of hormones is a huge one which impacts mitochondrial function. So can we see the changes over time and get insights as to whether what we are doing is working without, I suppose, lack of a better word, extreme testing that might not be available or applicable in some of these populations.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I was looking for. I think what gets confusing out there, people follow a lot of the podcasters and books out there. We're hearing a lot of the word VO2 max. But if we're talking about how to improve the aging process, that's volume of oxygen you can uptake. So it's looking at your peak volume of oxygen uptake as your like highest intensity, highest heart rate. But to improve quality of life, that's not measuring the function, the health of our mitochondria. So it's two different areas really to look at. More importantly, we want to look at the health of our mitochondria as we age, not, and there's many factors. It's not just VO2 max. There's just so much focus on that. So I was asking a random mixed up question, but really it's trying to get to what you're saying is that it's more about mitochondria function if we're looking at quality of life, not just what's your VO2 max? How cool are you?
Yeah.
Like, not the answer.
Peak performance is great, but it's not the be all and end all because that's not how we spend most of our day. And if we've got a great VO2 max, but we're not sleeping, we're stressed out and not eating food that supplies the building blocks for that cellular structure, we're not going to be feeling great and we're not going to get the outcomes that we desire.
So we always say mitochondria are your energy factories. They create ATP or our energy. So that is an important part of aging. So all of our whole body functions are dependent on this ATP, most everything. And then if we don't have quality mitochondria, if we have mitochondrial dysfunction, that is contributing to that quality of life going downhill rather than improving it as we age. So you're talking about what impacts mitochondria is not just how we exercise, but it's so much more to it. As you spoke about hormones, you spoke about sleep, stress management, nutrition. So it's not just how you're exercising, but how you're living life every day almost.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, is that ATP is the energy currency, and without it, we can't survive. So anything that we can do to improve those processes within that cell, particularly in the mitochondria where most of our metabolism happens, really helps. And even if it's not from weight loss, but just that energy perspective, the amount of people that think napping is normal, it's common, but it's not normal. So that's one of the things in clinic people say is, I just feel less blur. It's not a technical term, but I really get it because a lot of people do report it.
Yeah.
Or
Is
the
that a
energy
word
of
for
like the
bleh?
kids or the grandkids or quality
Yeah.
of sleep. And just for anyone of interest, particularly I'm sure who follows yourself or any of these physiology type of pages is, we see a lot about, something like cold plunges
Mhm.
and the impact on dopamine and hormones. But actually, one of the ways that they improve our health is they activate our brown fat, which as babies we have a lot of because our
Mhm.
surface area is quite great. So we have troubles with that regulating our temperature. So it can generate heat if we're feeling cold. So particularly important as babies. We tend to lose that over time. But it is brown fat because the mitochondria are so dense. That's how it gets its color. So by activating these cold shock proteins and things like that, that's one of the reasons it can work. But also on the flip
Mhm.
side, sauna is the same, activates, for example, heat shock proteins and these series of metabolic functions that can not only help with the mitochondria, but particularly, for example, those who are injured, it allows the blood vessels to get bigger and smaller through nitric oxide and those sorts of things, which keeps up that function of the blood vessels, which, as I said, when we're talking at extreme ends of VO2 max, but just in terms of, the ability to stand up without dizziness, that all comes down to that blood vessel health and structure and those sorts of things. So they're all interlinked. It's not always simple, but physiology is definitely fascinating. And as I said, that mitochondria can play an absolute key role.
So to improve your mitochondrial health, we've mentioned cold and sauna. Let's talk a little bit about anything to do with stress and specific things on sleep, and then we'll get to nutrition and exercise. So what would you say stress, how that has impact mitochondria? And then you mentioned sleep. Anything specific to tell people, just create awareness of those areas on your mitochondria function?
Yeah, so in terms of stress, anything that creates inflammation within the body, so you've got the hormones that we know about in terms of cortisol, but it can create insulin resistance, which I won't get too technical, but once again creates inflammation around the cells, which means they don't
Mhm.
function optimally. Carbohydrate metabolism might go out the window, and it starts off this really big negative cycle. I'm by all means no stress specialist. I even have the word relax tattooed on my wrist for that reason. But it's because I do understand the importance and the physiology behind those things. So things recommended in clinic is your simple, your journaling, your meditation, all of
Mhm.
these things. What works for one person might not work for the other.
Yeah, for sure. But
Um,
just chronic stress impacts your mitochondria in a roundabout way, probably more with the insulin resistance part of it and chronic
yeah,
inflammation.
absolutely. And I think the key word there is chronic.
Mhm.
Stress is a part of daily life. Um,
Yes.
but if it's chronic, that's when these issues set off those negative cycles and cascade of events, particularly when it comes to metabolism and mitochondria. So
Yeah.
same with sleep. One night sleep's not going to be as bad as a whole week's sleep, even though it can have an impact. It's when it becomes chronic that is an issue.
Mhm.
So I see a lot of people doing night shift and those sorts of
Yeah.
things, which understand we do have to do, but I want people to know it does have an impact in terms of cardiovascular risk and those sorts of things. Matt Walker is a great resource if you want to
Mm-hmm.
delve in deeper to any of this.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, is sleep is when our recovery occurs. That's when we get rid and recycle all of that cellular debris and
Mm-hmm.
autophagy and all those sorts of things that help improve that mitochondria
Mm-hmm.
occur. So if we're not getting it,
Mm-hmm.
it can't happen, and that has consequences. So just touching on, we can't ignore stress and sleep, but also recognizing they're not easy to change. But we definitely can't just neglect them overall and need to be aware of their impact.
Is this too, we're talking about mitochondria, but backing up metabolism. And then before that, it's fat metabolism, fat oxidation. Is that kind of being able to improve your mitochondrial health is making sure they're functioning at optimal level to improve how we age is a big overhead topic. But with the cold, the sauna, the acute stressors, then we have chronic stress impacts our mitochondria and our sleep, poor sleep habits over time. These different lifestyle habits can impact your mitochondria, which is it more not creating, is it impacting it in a negative way because of poor fat oxidation rates or and biogenesis, not creating new ones and then not getting rid of the dead ones? If we work backwards.
Speaking of the end, but what we do know is poor mitochondrial function, the body's not working as it's designed. When there's stresses in the body tends to burn glucose as opposed to fat.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very closely linked.
Yeah.
So extreme examples of that is like burns. Burns victims generally burn glucose because their body's under extreme stress. So all those little factors we mentioned before, as I said, tend to make us burn glucose as opposed to fat, which has huge implications, not only in terms of weight management, but without sounding like a broken record, the body is designed to burn fat. It is the most efficient fuel. It has consequences for aging as well. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
really interesting
Well,
to know.
I was like go backwards and getting a deeper layer, just like, oh yeah, this does this and does impacts this. But I was look at the why, and are we really keep coming down to same function as the fat oxidation? It's more carb metabolism versus fat metabolism. When we come down to the cellular level, why is it creating dysfunction? When we have crappy sleep every night, or we stay up all night long every week after week, that I think it's just looking at how it's not just what we eat and how we exercise, but how our mitochondria are impacted by these lifestyle habits. And I think it's,
Absolutely. And I would say maybe for in the clinical populations I see, about 80% lifestyle, particularly diet, has the biggest impact. It provides the building blocks for ourselves and our brain and all those sorts of things. But we,
mm-hmm,
as I said, is we can't neglect those other aspects, particularly as I said, as other things are changing, like hormones in females, is that can have a huge impact as well.
well, let's go. Do you have anything else to add on that? Why is that? Is that midlife as we are losing hormones or estrogens lower, progesterone? How is that impacting our mitochondria and our
Yeah, so
metabolism?
you do tend to find those going through hormonal changes, they're less efficient. So in terms of testing, there's 21% oxygen in the atmosphere. We generally find theirs is in the 17s when it should be in the 16s that they're breathing out, indicating they're not as efficient. And there's an article on our website if anyone is interested, and it talks about why we can't just blame a slower metabolism as we age. And it comes back to what we touched on before, the insulin resistance, carbohydrate metabolism changes causing inflammation in the cells, which changes differences in where we store weight and how easily we're able to burn fat. And that's where some of these issues arise, because standard is they say what I used to do doesn't work. And as you say, is estrogen jumps, it impacts mitochondrial function, fat oxidation, those sorts of things, not just the metabolic rate that we once saw.
I have done a bunch of solo podcasts on that and blogs because it makes me laugh that all this stuff we hear about, oh, this happened, your metabolism slows down as you age. And then you look at, again, I always go, okay, why is that? Tell me more. And all of it we can control except for the age and genetics. It's kind of ridiculous how we're told, it's all right. I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to get fatter as I get older. I'm going to get wrinkles. It's just going to
Yeah,
happen.
it's really interesting. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's the only way,
Yeah. It's
particularly
like
as I said in
normal
today's
versus
day and
optimal blood
age.
work, right? Being normal or optimal. Normal is not ideal.
Yeah.
Optimal is where you want to be. And what can you do about it?
Yeah, vitamin D is a huge one I see in clinic when it comes to that. It's optimal's 80, but people are 51 struggling with energy and all these things. They're like, yeah, but it's fine.
Mm-hmm. I know. And I'll point out, I swim master swimming at noon a few days a week in a swimsuit outside, and my vitamin D is still 40 something. And I definitely need to supplement. So, getting into later, if we have time, supplement where you need to, that's a good test to make sure you get your vitamin D measure. Because I know I have a client that she's at 16 on her vitamin D levels. And I know we say in FDN as practitioners, we want to be 60 to 80. And some people say even more than that. But it's just fascinating how you think you're outside. I've got my vitamin D covered, not so much for me at least. So
Yeah,
big
absolutely.
part.
Once again, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Yeah,
Um,
I know.
and I think it's in particularly the populations I deal with is your liver plays a key role
Mm-hmm.
in your vitamin D status. So once again, you want to reduce insults to that, such as these high fructose loads and those sorts of things, which only the liver can process, and that can sometimes help with some of those aspects. So it's not just, as I said, supplements are a tool in the kit, but once again, if we have a little bit deeper about why that might be occurring to improve that quality of life, there's definitely some other aspects we can have a look at.
Mm-hmm. So going into exercise, we talk a lot about zone 2 and your peak fat burning, and you want to be here to create more mitochondria. But there's also, do I do HIIT training, which is say we do 5 zones to make it simple. Zone 4 would be more HIIT training down to zone 1 for recovery. And then we're told to do sprint training. And Stacy Sims got everyone to know, okay, you need to do females need more time in doing zone 5 to zone 1. So, what do you say in your world talking to clients of all levels? What do you need to do exercise wise to improve your mitochondria function?
Potentially controversial, but it depends on what they're already doing. Something is always better than nothing.
Yes.
However, if you are already active, most of the research in terms of mitochondrial health has been in that aerobic, that huff and puff sort of space, and HIIT training is definitely valuable. The way it changes the environments of the cells, the way the blood vessels need to adapt, and all those sorts of things to create more dense and more functional mitochondria. And the really good news is now where we have the technology and opportunities to explore even further, and the results with resistance training are absolutely phenomenal. So, in terms of optimal results, if you can HIIT training, it is generally safe. Even for those with cardiovascular and blood pressure issues, the research is now coming out. We used to say no, 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 but now it's generally safe, well tolerated, which is really good. But combining that with the resistance-based training, you get the mitochondrial benefits, but also, particularly if you're losing weight, you're maintaining that muscle, helping in blood sugar level regulation and insulin sensitivity, and healthy aging, falls prevention and all those sorts of aspects that we can't get through any other platform.
So, what are the benefits you're finding of the strength training part you just mentioned is so important, but how is it helping the mitochondria the roundabout way?
Yeah, it's essentially providing that stimulus to make them more functional because it's creating a hormetic state, meaning it's providing an environment it's not used to, and it's making the nervous system talk to each other. It's helping those cells just change that environment, which creates that stimulus for change. As I said, 2 ways is better communication within the cell, more functional, but also more density within the mitochondria. So creating those signals that gets them to replicate and improve the density of those, which comes with improved health
I think
because of
that's
the
important. I
ATP
think
factors.
ATP, yeah. Sorry, I was talking over you. I think what you're saying is just the importance of what I love to talk about, that it's not just one size fits all. Everyone needs to do zone two, or everyone needs to do sprint work 4 days a week. That is so essential to improve how we age and improve brain health, as well as the benefits of strength training, and not just think, I want to lose weight, improve my fat oxidation levels, burn more fat. I need to do cardio. And I think that's what a lot of people are trained to think. I need to lose weight. I need to do 45 minutes on the cardio machines at the gym every day, or else I'm not going to lose weight. And
Yeah, I think it's really
not so
interesting.
much.
And I have patients presenting, as I said, something that comes to mind, busy mums always looking after everyone else. They're going to the gym doing high intensity stuff. They're not getting any results. It's they're likely those who aren't burning fat, they're going to do HIIT training, which exacerbates their cortisol response. They deplete their glycogen, so they'll be low in energy and more sedentary throughout the rest of the day and maybe even hungry. And that drive to eat just skyrockets. It's not like a willpower, it's physiology, which is really hard to override. So, number one, I just want to say is don't beat yourself up, but try and understand the physiology behind some of these things so you can optimize your results. But I think, as you say, it's really interesting in terms of the resistance training is often neglected, particularly when it comes to optimal health, because everyone just wants to lose weight. But it's more research is coming out, even in the space of, as you say, the mental health. It's a huge stimulus for brain-derived neurotropic factor. Tongue twister to say, but essentially, it really helps our cognition as we age.
Yeah.
It's one of the key signaling molecules, along with many other what they call exokines released
Mm-hmm.
during exercise. And the other aspect is, I know a lot of females that present are worried about their bone health, and lifting heavy is the only way you get there. Unfortunately, we
Mm-hmm.
tend to find people, don't want to get big. So they're lifting weights a lot of times doing endurance-based type weightlifting, but that's not going to help your bone and your structure and those signaling
Mm-hmm.
molecules which are involved with that. So
Mm-hmm.
we know even in your 60s to 80s, you can lift heavy. So what that looks like is lifting a weight 5 times as opposed to 20, but it's heavier.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to help a lot of these things more.
Yes, for sure. I think it's important to talk about, because so many people, I just watched at the gym, and I was trying to do a video this morning, like, okay, how do you sit? If you're not getting the results that you're wanting, and you want to see your body change, you need to maybe switch it up and do something different, and not try do the same thing over and over again expecting different results. That strength training is finally, I think, growing. I know it's getting more popular, but I still see girls in the gym lifting light weights, doing gazillion repetitions. And, they're doing it, but they're just like, you're doing great, doing strict training, but can we adjust it? After you build a base and maybe start to go a little heavier. But I think people are still afraid of getting big and bulky if they lift heavy weights. But I think hopefully gradually that's changing as people speak out more about it.
Yeah, and once again, in terms of physiology, I'm sure some people are genetically inclined that way, but most of us are not. Really, what happens is we improve our function of the nerves and the mitochondria without putting on bulk, unless you
Mm-hmm.
specifically train that
Yeah.
that high reps and load, like bodybuilding type things. It generally doesn't occur. And once again, is in terms of safety, it is generally safe. And people are worried about injury, but once again, if we have that strength, if we have those nervous systems talking to each other better, we're less likely to injure ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of shifted the focus on how we age as last few years on this podcast, because I'm watching my dad pass away 2 years ago. Well, it'll be 3 years this summer, and watching my mom and just seeing her at now 83, and seeing what happens to her and all of her friends, and how many people are passing away. And that's what's really kind of re-fired up my focus on this show and help people. Let's do everything we can do now, because that is about muscle strength. That's mobility. That's balance. To be able to get off the floor and get back up. That's the kind of stuff I want to see us training, not just training for a marathon or a triathlon. It's like, all right, can I get up and can I climb the stairs without holding on? And all that strength that we need as we're older is so essential to quality of life.
And I think that is really important. We need to talk about function. And
Mm-hmm.
that might not even mean going to the gym, because I want to say is you're never too old. There's so many videos and resources out there that have shown is,
Mm-hmm.
yes, ideally we want to be active throughout our whole life, but there are benefits from starting now, whether you're 20, 60, or 80. So what that might even look like is doing some sit to stands at home while you're waiting to the kettle to boil, or some calf raises, or
Mm-hmm.
brushing your teeth on one leg, or
Mm-hmm.
doing a tricep dip in the chair to help you get up and off the floor and out of the chair.
Yeah, I think those
So
are important. And we talk a lot about as we're in our, I'm 53 somehow already, and my husband's 55. And we talk about, okay, when are you going to retire? And one of his friends said, it's, in your 60s should be the go-go years, not be working full time all the time. That maybe take more time for vacation so you can do all that stuff that it was someone's book I was hearing a podcast on, but just how we wait until save all your money in retirement and until you're too old, you can't do anything with it. You can't travel, and that you should start to do things now that you want to do. Don't wait until you're retired or 90 years old and you can't travel, or you don't want to go travel 10-hour flight around somewhere different country and explore the world. That I think if you want to do stuff that involves traveling, for example, I think it's more motivation to enjoy life in the aging process and don't wait until it's too late to do all this that involves having to sit on a plane and travel by these different countries. I just think it's so important to not just it's the quality of life part and living life to the fullest every day as much as you can.
yeah, I agree. I'm a huge advocate of don't wait, the perfect time is now. And whether that be that holidaying aspect or just to start something, is we're like, oh, I'll wait till work settles down. And then guess what? Work never settles down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
Or, 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 or whatever it may be in yours. I'll wait till the kids are older. Whatever the situation is, the perfect
Yeah,
time is now. Because if you're thinking about it, there's a reason. And
that's true.
on that note is, I think it's often neglected. I'm personally not a goal setter. We talk about smarter goals and it can get really complicated. But people who have good why reasons are more likely to succeed. Is it you want to look good on the beach, or is it because you want the energy to be able to play with the kids? That person
Yeah,
is more likely to succeed. So
yeah,
think about your why reasons, and they're going to be really personal. Write them down. If you write them down, you're more likely to do them.
hmm, yeah,
The
for
simple
sure. I think
act.
it makes a difference. Writing them down. I have a journal, try set intentions for the week ahead, and then having a spouse that you do stuff with, or your partner or friends, to meet accountability buddies. Because if my husband and I didn't go to the gym together at 5:15 in the morning, it'd be so easy to skip if we didn't have each other to support each other, especially that time of day. It's like,
Yeah, I even
roll
say
over.
is when you leave the gym, if you're a member of the gym, the staff member might not even be working tomorrow or Friday. But if you do the simple act of saying is see you on Friday, you've mentally committed to that session.
Hmm.
Yes, you're an adult, you don't need to go, but essentially you're setting yourself up for success.
We do that all the time. There's a group of guys in the morning, and if you're not there, you get razzed. Like, I didn't show up yesterday, and you get made fun of. So it's a good motivation to have gym buddies. But anyways, I want to go back to metabolism testing. With the metabolism testing, we talk about resting metabolism. Do you do exercise metabolism testing on everybody?
No, not personally. And once again, there's a key role, particularly for performance.
Mm-hmm.
But what I tend to find is in the metabolic cart space, there are carts that can do both, but it's like a dual cab ute. It doesn't do either optimally.
Mm. So you do
So, as I
mostly
said,
resting with your patients that you're working with.
yeah, I find it provides that information that we can retest over time
Mhm.
for that education and validation purposes.
So when you're doing a resting metabolism test, could you walk us through the data you get when you get the test? It's a resting metabolic rate, that number. And we get maybe your calories you burn throughout the day, maybe if you have calories, if I exercise, and here's the total amount you need to eat. And then if you are trying to lose weight, you would do this. Do you have any type of order of operations, protocols, stuff that you do with figuring, explaining that to people, how that works if you're
Absolutely.
measuring?
And I suppose, as I attended to before, the first one I actually look at is fat oxidation. It's going to have a bigger impact on outcomes than anything else. So that's what I have a look at first. So in terms of that is, well, what impacts fat oxidation? Is anything that gives us a physiological stress. So psychological stress is an impact. We talked about sleep, but nutrition is a huge one there. And the paper using real life data looks at therapeutic carbohydrate restriction and the way that can change an individual's fat metabolism through signaling molecules such as insulin. So that would be the first one to have a look at, is because once again, the goal of, for example, something like weight loss isn't actually weight loss. We can chop off an arm and lose 6 to 10 kilos, but we actually want fat loss. And that's just as a side note, is they've had a look at people, for example, who've had liposuction. It removes the fat, but it doesn't improve outcomes, particularly for things like fatty liver, because it's subcutaneous fat, not the fat around the organs. So what we want to do is have that ability to burn our own fat. And that's once again is if you are burning fat, you have the ability to eat your own fat for breakfast, for example. They're the prime candidates for fasting.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Now, are
And
you
then,
testing your resting? Are you taking the RMR that you get from the testing? Do you use that with people?
yeah, so that's, as I said, what I might have a look at next is their metabolic rate. Only about 10% of people in the clinic have a slow metabolic rate. Generally not an issue. But what I like to say is if you do want to have a look at calories in versus calories out, your RMR, your resting metabolic rate, is a good starting point in terms of meeting the essential needs of the body, in terms of immunity and function. But the deficit comes from, as I said, that activity and the energy used to digest the food that we're eating and those sorts of things, technical term being thermogenesis.
Mm-hmm.
So metabolic rate is a good starting point for what to feed to. And this is, I'm also talking about chronic disease weight loss patients as opposed to athletic performance. And you do need to do a few more calculations in terms of energy requirements, looking at muscle loss, fatigue levels, recovery, all those sorts of aspects. And then also have a look at that mitochondrial function, the FeO2 score that, as I said, the cut I use, ECAL, gives us back as an indicator for that mitochondrial function and what's happening there. Because someone could have really high metabolic rate, but it's because they're inefficient. Like a car, that's not necessarily a good thing.
So how do you determine the metabolism, the RMR, from explain how you're just using a face mask, you're measuring the oxygen in, the carbon dioxide out. How do you get a resting metabolic rate? How many calories you need at rest from that?
Yeah, so as you highlight a breathing test, we actually use a mouthpiece, not a mask, specifically designed for this sort of testing. So by having a look at oxygen consumptions, we know that at the cellular level, mainly in that mitochondria we've mentioned a lot during this podcast, is the food we eat, the fuel, combines with oxygen in the cells to give us our energy and also some waste products such as carbon dioxide. So we're looking at those two gases enables us to have a look at metabolic rate is, as I said, mainly from that oxygen consumption. And then by looking at the CO2, we're able to look at what fuels are being used, because when we're burning purely fat in a resting state, once again, this is where it can get complex, but in a resting state, it represents what we're using at a cellular level. And the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide is 0.7 when we're burning fat. When we're burning purely glucose, it's 1. So that's how we're able to determine those sorts of aspects as well. Once, when I was back at uni, we used a method called the Douglas bag, and we need to do all the calculations and those sorts of things, which is really not applicable in a clinical sort of setting, maybe in a research sort of setting. So that's why I love using the metabolic card I do, because the software does all those calculations so I can focus on the main event, which is the patient.
Yes, I was looking up once, like, what exactly is a calculation to get to, say, I need 1,500 calories a day? There's a lot of math involved in that.
Yeah, so a lot of engineering and maths involved with them. Absolutely. And as I said, you can look into it. But being a practitioner, I think it's really important to say, that's great, but how do we use this data to have an impact at an individual level?
And it's not necessarily calories in, calories out, is it? If they're trying to lose weight. So if you have a lot of people in a weight loss clinic, metabolic health, are you looking at like a calorie deficit as people used to do, or is there different strategies you do these days to
Yeah,
create
and
weight
that's why I
loss?
said it comes back to, you can't manage what you don't measure. Is calories might be more important, or even meal frequency, for those that are burning fat, but that's only about a third of individuals. Fat oxidation for anyone losing weight is key.
And then
And that's where, as I said, things
secret.
like the therapeutic carbohydrate restriction
Mhm.
can come into play.
And what is therapeutic levels for carb restriction? Like grams per day of carbohydrates or per meal? How do you determine?
The key is testing, is seeing whether that gets them to a level that enables them to burn fat. So for an elite athlete, that might be 150 grams, 200 grams still. But for most general populations, I would say about 50 grams.
50. Yeah, because there's so much into the carnivore space doing zero carbs, and then very strict keto for people with metabolic health issues might be 20 grams, but up to 50 grams is what I've heard for years. So I don't know if
Yeah,
that's still in the range for
yeah,
people.
and I suppose that comes down to, is similar to blood pressure, is most people benefit from, simple lifestyle strategies up
Mm-hmm.
here, and then you reassess and tweak over time depending on what's happening. We need to be doing the same with any tool we have in our kit, which carbohydrate restriction is one. Is, yes, carnivore and ketogenic diets are a tool in the kit, and I'm a strong advocate for them in the appropriate person. But is it necessary for 80% of people doing them? Maybe not.
That's where you personalize the program for the based on
Yes,
the results testing. And how often do you
absolutely.
test?
What was that? Sorry.
How often do you have to test them when you're working on making a shift?
It depends on what we're having a look at. So generally, a couple of weeks early intervention when we're assessing what is actually going on with the body. When things like supplements or exercise are involved, 6 to 8 weeks, a little bit longer. And then you want to look at maintenance sort of levels, 3 to 6 months, like a dental checkup, making sure that things are still on track before anything becomes a huge issue.
And I wanted to, sorry, I know we're running out of time, but can you touch on the research? Like, I've done some information on this in other podcasts, but lactate metabolism involved in this. I know Ben Bickman has spoke about a lactate metabolism on his podcast and about how this can be higher levels with people that are precursors towards being insulin resistant. Pre type 2 diabetes might be higher lactate, and how you would identify this in your metabolism testing. Have you done any of that work?
No, so essentially, we're looking at rest. The two main fuels the body uses is carbohydrates and fat. We shouldn't be using protein in maybe in ICU, and there's ways that we can have a look at those titrations with nitrogen. But the assumption is that we're using fat and carbohydrates. Where lactate comes into that, and I say lactate as opposed to lactic acid, which I'll touch on in a moment, it is a molecule that can be used as a fuel, but that would be represented in glucose metabolism because there's a series of steps that convert that lactate into glucose so that they do have fuel available. But once again, those who are insulin resistant tend to be glucose burners, which once again is why we want to target that insulin resistance so they can switch over to fat and get better outcomes, not only for their blood sugar levels, but so many other aspects involved. So might be worth just touching on is, we used to talk so much about lactic acid as this bad molecule. It's in the body, it's not even an acid molecule because of the structure. But we know that now it can be used as a fuel source. It's also a signaling molecule, particularly when we talk about brain health and Alzheimer's and that BDNF, the brain-derived neurotropic factor. It has key roles in that as well. And it's generally not the reason we have to stop exercise. That's generally down to nervous system fatigue or hypometabolism in the brain. So that might be a story for another day. There's some papers circulating about carbohydrate dosing and in terms of that brain hypometabolism and whether it's necessary. But once again, if we're burning fat at rest, we generally don't get as many brain hypos, which means we improve that endurance performance. So once again, is in the body and physiology, nothing is simple as A equals B, and that's, the energy out is a factor, but it's not the be all and end all. Our body doesn't work like maths, it works like physiology and biology. So once again, some of the wishy-washiness to the answers, it comes down to the individual in testing.
That's how it is. It depends. So as we wrap up, we've talked about metabolism and mitochondria, fat oxidation. So what would you send us off with? How to improve our fat oxidation rates? How do we burn more fat at rest? Give it a summary list.
Those key elements which we've touched on throughout. Diet is huge. And from a physiology perspective, there is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate because the body can make it within the liver. So we want to focus on essential nutrients. They're the ones that the body cannot make. So essential fatty acids, your omega-3s, and essential amino acids through protein. So we want to focus on those. They're the foundation. Once again, we want to make sure we're not stressing it out even more with, overtraining or type of exercise if you're not burning fat. And also looking at, the sleep and the stress and all those other aspects which give off that physiological stress, which means that the body switches over. And once again, this is where we want to make sure we're burning fat, and then we can get the optimal results from things like exercise and fasting.
Yeah, I think it's a key part is working on what we're eating, but also the how, why, when, where, all that's so important that I find we can eat all this great food, but we don't properly digest it because we're eating it in a stressed state, shutting off digestion and being mindless, not eating mindfully is a great area to work on too. I see people eating healthy, but then they haven't shifted their eating habits. They're like inhaling.
Yeah, a couple of tips on that note is, eating with the opposite hand.
Oh yeah.
Or putting your knife
Chopsticks.
and fork down between each mouthful until you finish to help with that mindfulness. But once again, we've been drilled into us, we need to eat 6 times a day. It doesn't slow your metabolism if you don't. I can guarantee you I've done testing over about 15 years now. And also is eat when we're hungry, because some people, as I said, particularly middle-aged females going through the hormone changes, they try and eat what they used to eat. But if they're not hungry, it's likely an indicator that your body's burning fat. So it is getting fuel, but from your own body fat sources. It doesn't always need to be external, similar to the carbohydrate load. So
Yeah, good
interesting
point.
point to finish up on.
Yeah, well, so much great information. Sorry, my questions didn't come out right. It's my evening and I don't function. I get up early, so my brain doesn't function as well. And I need to go for my walk and my sauna to improve my brain drive neurofactor. But
Absolutely.
I off my game. But I appreciate all your wisdom, and you've been in this a long time. So it's great that you found your sounds like what you're passionate about.
Absolutely. And as I
Yeah.
said, you're always learning and just helping patients and celebrating the little wins means reading all those papers and all that admin side of things are definitely worth it.
Amazing. So where can people learn more about what you're working on and your research?
Yeah, so in terms of practitioners and research side of things, LinkedIn, Kirsty Woods, and Twitter, Metabolic EP. I post case studies and
Oh,
research. For patients, the clinic I run, MHS Clinics, has a lot of information about what we talked about today, and the website Metabolic Health Solutions and the clinics page there also has a lot about what we can talked about today from the patient's perspective.
amazing. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes and we'll probably have to do a follow-up because we didn't get to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, all the brain health. I'm really doing some different episodes on, so we'll have to have you come back on to dive into how to improve the cognitive health as we age.
Absolutely. But once again, it all comes back to metabolism. So we can't neglect it.
Yes. So follow along. We'll take good notes and put them in the show notes so we can be our best self in the future and strive to thrive, not struggle as you get older.
Absolutely.